Alright, hi everybody. As mentioned, I'm Ryan. I'm here to talk to you about WP API. It's a project I've been working on for, I think, 8 weeks now. I've been working on that pretty heavily and hoping to get that into a WordPress course soon. Talk about that a bit. Just to introduce myself, I'm Ryan, as mentioned. You may know me as the developer of SimplePy or Request. They're PHP libraries. SimplePy is used by WordPress to power some of the widgets and the news on your dashboard. I've been working with WordPress for I think about 7 years or so. I've been contributing back to WordPress for 5 years. I also work with Bronson and Lockheed at Senza. So some of those projects that Bronson mentioned earlier, I've worked on those. And I'm also a developer currently on the Google Summer of Code working on this project. So what am I talking about? So I'm talking about my Summer of Code project here. So recently what we've seen is that WordPress has been moving from a blog and a CMS to more of an application platform, where we're not just building, sites that people go to, we're building things that people can build off of. So WordPress itself has started including a lot of things to help along with this, but it still needs to get better. So I'm having to build some of these tools. So one of these is a new API for WordPress. So if you ever go onto your site, you'll see your theme, of course, and you've got your dashboard. And those are 2 ways you can get access to your content, but there's so many other ways. We've got desktop clients, like Windows Live Writer, I'm not sure if that's still around. Mars Edit has been around for quite a long time. We've now got mobile clients, which have sprung up fairly recently, and those have become fairly popular. In fact, there's 2% of WordPress users out there who've never actually used the dashboard. They only use mobile clients. So that's a very strange statistic. And then of course we've got front-end code we can build off of this. So if we're building websites using Backbone and things like that, where we're trying to make the experience a lot more fluid for users, we want to sort of be able to access our content in a more programmatic way, rather than having to go through our theme all the time. And so let's have a look at what WordPress has been doing with these APIs. I mean, this is certainly not the first project that's trying to make one of these APIs. There have been lots of APIs in WordPress since the very start. There's one in there at the moment, but the idea is we've got to try and increase these. So in 1999, Dave Weiner came out with the XMLRPC specification. So you might have seen this term around. XMLRPC is a fairly popular platform. It's used for the majority of blogs to be able to access this sort of content programmatically. It also formed the basis of SOAP. So if anybody's worked with SOAP, I'm sorry. This is where that comes from. And this really became popular with the rise of movable type and things like that. Where movable type went on extended XMLRPC with a lot of their own methods to be able to access more blog-style content. This is what an XMLRPC call looks like. It might look a bit cryptic. That's one of the big problems with XMLRPC. As you can see, it's got a method name in there, it's got some parameters, but there's all this sort of boilerplate around it. It's also based on XML, which is really hard to work with. A lot of platforms have XML tools, but they usually don't work very well, to the point of just being downright broken. And it also reinvents what we've already got with HTTP. We're sending in these methods here, and they all go to the single URL, this RPC2 URL. We can do better than that. We've got all the tools provided to us by HTTP. So in 2007, the Atom syndication format was released, which is similar to RSS. And along with it came this protocol called the Atom Publishing Protocol, known as Atom Pub. It's sort of like XMLRPC, but it's a lot simpler, and it's a lot more standardized as well. It's also designed specifically for blog APIs. It's not sort of a general purpose one like XMLRPC. The problem is, as you can see, still XML. It's very verbose. There's a lot of boilerplate there. You can see there's an endpoint there that accepts 3 types of image formats, and it's got so much text around that it's almost impossible to spot the first time you see that. So to be able to pass this sort of information out, to be able to do anything useful with it, you've got to have fairly complicated passes, and there's also a lack of widespread support. So not many things actually include support for AtomPub, despite it being, in my opinion, a better API than XMLRPC. So while all these sort of developments are going on, WordPress is debating internally as to what it was using. XMLRPC was built in since, I think, the very first version of WordPress. It's certainly been a very long time. It had very good support to start out with, but unfortunately it wasn't updated very much. So it got to a point where it was starting to be seen as insecure. So this is when the Atom Pub API was introduced, that's 7 years ago. And I believe this was in version 2.3. And this set the benchmark for Atom Pub support across other platforms as well. WordPress's support for Atom Pub was actually really good to start with. So in 2.3, we've got 2 great choices. We've got XMLRPC, which is what you want if you want widespread support. We've got Atom Pub if you want a bit of a simpler sort of simple WordPress UI. And then we get to a point where the APIs are being unmaintained. So they're starting to fall behind the features in WordPress. They're becoming increasingly insecure. Hardly anybody was actually using them at this point. There were a few desktop clients, Mars was one of them. But unfortunately, no one was really testing these to the sort of standard that WordPress expects. So seeing as this was a fairly big security issue, it was decided that they'd take that out, and although the code was still there, it would be disabled by default. So now we end up with no choices. There's no way to get your data out of a format that you can use in your program. You can still go in and enable it in the admin, but it's very confusing to sort of to end users who just want to install a piece of software, go onto it, and be able to access the content on the site. And in addition, they're still fairly unmaintained. So hosts would recommend leaving them disabled. They recommend that very strongly. And then the smartphone comes along, and suddenly there's a lot more demand for getting your sort of content programmatically. The API support in WordPress though, still pretty horrible. Still disabled by default, and not many users could really work around that without going through giant tutorials. So thankfully we had a huge effort from teams related to mobile projects to get the XMLRPC API to scratch. So in 3.5, XMLRPC got enabled by default, and the option to disable it was actually partially removed. So now we're at a point where we've got one good choice, because it's there, and we've got half the choice in AtomPub, because that's still a little bit out of date. Then 3.5 also decided to remove AtomPub completely and put it out into a plugin. So now we've got 2 sort of choices. We've got the XMLRPC API, which is, great to use, still a pain to work with, but at least everybody has it. And then we've got AtomPub, which is in a plugin, so we can get our users to install that. But really, that's not a choice. If we're going to tell people to go out and start using this software, they're not going to enjoy installing plugins just to have it work. So XMLRPC, as I mentioned, is a fairly solid API. It does work. It's been updated enough now that it's at a point where it's fairly stable, but it's not very easy to work with if you're trying to make this sort of software. It requires some special handling, for the stuff. You have to understand types and methods and all this sort of boilerplate around it. There's problems on both ends of that. So one of the big problems there is the misconfigured servers. In PHP, there's a lot of problems with both producing and parsing XML. I've seen this a lot as the developer of Simplify. You quite often get servers where things just don't work. Documentation says they should work, and you try it and it just spits out errors. So it's impossible to rely on anything working in that sort of configuration. So this is one of the bugs that we've seen where it will just strip out the leading angle bracket on every single tag in a post content. This is caused by a bug in PHP that was really hard to hunt down, but actually occurs in a fair few installations, especially on Linux systems, which is what a lot of servers are, where a lot of distributions will compile their own versions of PHP with different versions of the underlying software embedded in those. Then we've also got broken libraries. So on the client side, there's a heap of errors with just getting, once you've got the data, how do I do something with that? So one of these here is, I believe this is for the iOS client. XML, as anybody who's worked with XHTML, we have to tell you, is really strict about handling errors. So they actually had to work around this by dedicating 40% of the code base just to clean that up. And thanks to the server errors and the sloppy coding on the WordPress side, there's no real way to work around it. There's also problems with using other languages. So basically, XML is hard. It's working, but it's really buggy. And it's very hard to use on clients like iOS and the Android client, because they need tons of work around it. So, now that we've seen what doesn't work, what should we look at? So these are sort of a combination of the best practices and a wish list. The first one is, we want something that's easy to produce and to parse. We want something that we can use very easily. We want something that we can respond to very easily. Something that is just simple overall. And if we're getting to a point where we've got 40% of the code base to work around things, then we're doing it wrong, obviously. So the best language, in my opinion, to work with this sort of thing is JSON. JSON is really easy to parse and produce. It basically maps to every language out there. It's pretty mature and stable, so it's unlikely that anything's going to change in that. And it's basically built in to most languages. PHP has built-in support for it. And iOS and Android both have very good libraries for doing that. Second thing we want is to reuse what we've already got. So we've got HTTP clients that can go out and fetch pages for us. There's no need to reinvent it with all the stuff that we saw in XMLRPC where we go, I want to do this method on this. Why can't we just simplify it down to, let's get this or let's update this? And then the third thing we really need is official built-in support. We want something that we know is going to be there. We want something that we know is going to work. Because if we don't have either of those, then what's the point of using it? It's just not going to be there on half the thing. So this is where the project I've been working on comes in. It ticks all of the boxes we've just seen and more. And here's a bit of a look at it. So let's say we want to get a bunch of posts. We go get post. It's pretty simple, and any HTTP client can understand this. So if you go into your browser, you can actually just browse through that URL, and it will get you all the posts. We can also see the setting for editing posts. In this case, we've got a put post, but you can also use post instead. And these are supported by 100% of HTTP clients. And the ones that don't support put can fall back onto the post. This also works with a thing that's specified in the WP API documentation. called entities, which look like this. So this is actually the view of a post as I look at it in my browser. Shrunk a few of the items down there because they didn't fit on the screen otherwise. But otherwise, that has all the data that WordPress stores internally. So we're getting all the data here. It's all in a fairly easy to understand format. We can even view it in our browsers, that's how simple it is. So we can make it go. We've got easy to produce and parse. And we've got JSON. JSON works in pretty much everything. It works in browsers. It works on basically every language that we need. We've got something that speaks HTTP. So anything that can connect to the site can use this. There's no need for extra handling on top of that. And it's very easy to use in browsers as well, because obviously JSON comes from JavaScript, which is used in browsers. Part of the project that I've worked on just recently includes backbone support. So theoretically, you should be able to just include that, start using those, and basically get out of the gate running. So, when can we start using this? There's plans underway for core integration. Might take a little while. Hopefully 3.8 will have this, which is coming out, I believe, November, December-ish, hopefully. But it might get pushed up because obviously this is a large project. There's plenty of people here who have a stake in the project. So the current timeline for the rest of my summer of code project, at least, this week and next week I'm working on media and attachments. Then revisions, terms and taxonomies, then we're on to final testing and review. So as you can see, there's quite a few features still to add, but it is moving fairly fast. But you can actually start using it right now. Obviously you can't rely on it being available on every site, and it's not production ready code. There still are things changing in this. So to install it, basically search for the plugin and install it, or you can download it manually and keep in touch with the code that way. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
What's REST?
Okay, so REST is basically HTTP, but it has a few sort of extra specifications on top of that. It basically says if you want to create a post, you should use the verb post. If you want to update a post, you should use the verb put. So things like that, sort of making sure that we're working with the web rather than reinventing things on top of it.
What do you imagine the process will be to support custom post types, especially when they're often used to make a CMS with a plugin like just custom fields, when the data is no longer mapped to the WordPress tables, it becomes what's been set up through a function .php file?
So the idea with this is to make custom post types quite easy. So if we go back, you can actually see at the bottom here there's a post meta field that will have by default all the custom metadata in there. So clients can support that out of the box. The idea though is that plugins will build on top of this. So they'll be able to add extra fields onto here and say, for example, for WooCommerce, they'll be able to add a price field that will give the price of the product there. I've tried fairly hard to make sure that that's quite easy to do. Hopefully it works. This week I'm also adding in page support. Pages are already supported, but this will be adding some extra data just for pages. Sort of as a demonstration of how custom post types would work for having support.
So the process would probably be for developers setting up custom post types for a client side. If that client needs WP API support, they would then work on another layer, extend WP API.
Yeah, so basically you would just, as part of the plugin that's adding custom post types, you would just add an extra class in there that adds some extra support into the API. Yep.
Would that be the same for custom fields?
Yes. So the idea is that this is sort of a baseline for everything that WordPress supports out of the box. If you want to do more complicated stuff with it, the idea is to make that very easy, certainly possible to do.
In terms of namespaces,
Yep.
like slash posts, slash something, is that it's probably not the only URL.
Yep. So just to go back, the /post is not actually the very start of it. It looks more like /wp-json.php/post. So everything is contained underneath that. So theoretically, it shouldn't interfere with anybody's sites unless somebody's made a file called wp-json. So good luck if you have. Any other questions?